Welcome back again. And again, for the last poll for you, please go to the message box and log on and give your views on the question. What first comes to your mind when talking about smart connectivity? And we'll show the poll results at the end of the session.
This is our last but not least session on smart and sustainable connectivity. This session will discuss how to enhance connectivity through inclusive, smart and sustainable cooperation between ASEAN and dialogue partners, and to synergize in areas of mutual benefits. For this session, we are honored to have panelists from various ASEAN partners.
And the moderator for this session will be Almut Weitz, the Transport Practice Manager for Southeast Asia and the Pacific from the World Bank. Almut, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Kun Sanin and Janine, and welcome everybody. I hope you can both hear and see me. So as Janine explained, my name is Almut Weitz. I'm the Transport Manager for the World Bank based in Singapore. I'm delighted to be here. And there's a bit of echo and noise in the background, but I'm hoping we're going to get through this and everybody can understand. Not sure where that is coming from. Not from me. I'm in a very quiet room here. So very delighted to see some familiar faces and maybe also some people that I haven't met before. I look forward to our session. As the organizers explained, this is the last one, but I hope we still have the full energy of everybody, both on the panel and among those listening in, trying to understand the details of every presentation. And please post your questions or whatever you have. Don't wait until you forget them again at the end. So we'll get started right away. We have a distinguished list of 5 guests. The original idea was we have the presentation and then the question. I'm going to start you off with the question and then you do your presentation in one go. So we have a little bit of time at the end for other people to ask questions. So maybe without further ado, can I invite Dr. Fraser Thompson, the Director of Alpha Beta Advisory. A quick question up front, and maybe that's also how you frame your presentation, Fraser. Australia is obviously a key supporter in implementing the MPAC 2025. What would be, in your view, concrete collaboration activities that Australia could contribute to in terms of smart and sustainable connectivity in the region? Over to you. I'll mute myself. And each of you have a very short 7 minutes, and I'm going to be very gentle, but still trying to enforce that. Over to you, Fraser. Thanks.
Terrific. Hi, everyone. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to present. I'll try to be very short because I realise we are short on time. So as background, Alpha Beta, we had the privilege of supporting the ASEAN Secretariat in developing the ASEAN Connectivity Master Plan. We also conducted the midterm review of the ASEAN Master Plan recently. So what I'm going to share today is just some brief reflections from those experiences based on the topic today. Very briefly, first of all, why is connectivity so important? And we've heard lots of these things today, but I think in the midterm review, we talked about the potential size of the prize that we look at from connectivity if we get this right? And we've heard in infrastructure about the $35.9 billion of infrastructure pipeline that could potentially be developed. In digital, we've already heard all about the innovations that are possible there. Logistics, a huge amount of GDP improvement from addressing border constraints. Similarly, regulatory excellence and people mobility. So there's a huge prize there. But it's also a really crowded area. And so we spent quite a lot of time in the midterm review trying to understand what others are doing and how do we enhance that kind of collaboration. And when we looked at these other programs, you can really split them into 2 areas. One is around those that are operating at a global or regional level. So think about sort of the BRI and kind of APEC connectivity initiative. And then you have a number of sub-regional ones, for example, IMTGT, BPIAGA, Greater Mekong sub-region, etc. And when we looked at the kind of levels of engagement today, it varies. And not surprisingly, because it's too difficult to engage with everyone to a high level degree. Things like the BRI, the new Southern Policy and the EU strategy for quality infrastructure, really high engagement today. But in certain other areas, particularly when we look at some of the sub-regional programs in the GMS, for example, much lower engagement. So I think one of the big things that came out of that review was saying, well, how do we think about strengthening, particularly at the sub-regional level, that level of engagement and cooperation? So when we come to sort of some of the recommendations, and you would have seen this in the executive summary from the midterm review, but just to spell out some of the big things just to get the conversation started. So the first one around was convening the connectivity. So we talked about having an annual workshop or symposium where representatives from the sub-regional programs, from some of these broader regional programs can share what they're doing, and we get a better understanding of kind of where the linkages are and to how to push that. And I think this symposium today is a great start in that direction. Secondly, we looked at how do we improve consultation with dialogue partners on ASEAN connectivity. And I think one of the reflections was that the current annual forums between the ACCC and the dialogue partners are good, but they could be strengthened. Some of them is more around sort of dialogue partners saying, look, they're promoting and advertising what they're doing, but not really as a joint working session of how do we take things further and really getting the sectoral bodies involved. So there are some ideas there to think about. Also discussion of a connectivity dialogue partners working group and other external partners working group to get sort of more practical and to create sort of preparation at the kind of really technical level to drive more project level collaboration. And then the final area was thinking about when we think about new initiatives and new projects related to MBAC 2025, actually involving dialogue partners and other external partners in the project conceptualization stage to strengthen those linkages. So look, I'll stop there, but looking forward to the discussion that follows. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. My goodness, that was efficient. Perfect. It gets us started, and I'm delighted. Thank you very much. These are really good thoughts. So we'll keep going. We're going around the table. So I think next I have the European Union. I have Harvey Rouse, who's the Director General of MOVE. I'm just going to call it MOVE. I don't know whether it's better to say Mobility and Transport of the European Commission. But, and he will be joined by Mr. Carl Vink, I understand, who I can also see online. Hello. Just because you're two, you don't get more time, but the efficient example of Fraser will probably help you a little bit in framing your position. So let me just ask you a question up front, and I'm sure that's how you've also framed your presentation. I mean, the European Union has obviously one of the most successful integrated and connected railway systems that some of us in Asia are dreaming of, right? I wish we would have that here, but we don't have it yet. So what concrete cooperation do you see and do you think can the EU and ASEAN expand on in order to promote smart and sustainable connectivity within ASEAN? Over to you. I guess, Harvey, you will start. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Almud, and dear Excellencies who are on this call, and colleagues and many friends also. And thank you, Fraser, for giving us a bit more time. And Almud, actually, I'm not Director General, but thank you for the promotion. I'm actually heading up the international relations for transport in the EU. So from our side, indeed, we are going to split into two parts. What I will do is I will seek to try and give you a picture from 60,000 feet up, actually on connectivity. So what we are doing with reference to Asia, and especially, of course, to ASEAN. And then my esteemed colleague, Mr. Carol Vink, who is the former European coordinator for railways, he'll bring us back down to ground level and give us an express train view on the importance of rail and that specific question that you've raised, Almut, in terms of it is definitely the most sustainable form of connectivity. I think we have a unique EU experience to share, and therefore how the EU and ASEAN could enhance rail cooperation in the future. So if I may start this intervention, actually one of the things I want to do is just go back a month, and that was at the beginning of December, the foreign ministers of the EU and ASEAN, they agreed to elevate our relations from a dialogue to a strategic partnership. Now, not only was this a major signal, I would say, of confidence between the two regions, but of course, key to enhancing our relations is, of course, connectivity. And throughout the day today, and a very good afternoon, of course, to all friends in ASEAN, and good morning to those in Europe. You've been very clever in crossing these time zones. Today, connectivity is very much a buzzword. It's essential in a globalized world. Perhaps it's overused to some extent. But why is it so important? Quite simply, and this is the EU experience, it is a necessity for trade, for economic growth, for job creation, and it's also very important for bringing people and cultures together, which is very much the EU experience. Now, in the concept paper for this seminar, it was interesting to see that the ASEAN and yourselves, World Bank, you conducted this study on connecting the connectivities. And that study, it revealed no less than 16 regional connectivity initiatives, which have directly or indirectly involving ASEAN member states. So this shows that there's a lot going on, but it also shows that we do need, indeed, synergies between these initiatives. Now, in terms of the EU, you'll be aware that a couple of years ago in 2018, the EU adopted a strategy on connecting Europe and Asia. And through this communication, we sent an important signal that the EU remains strongly committed to engaging with Asia and increasing our connectivity. Now, the EU, and you're very right in that beginning question that you asked, we have a lot of experience. Let's not forget that we have had our internal connectivity strategy, the Trans-European networks, for over 3 decades. So it's no exaggeration to say that these networks are, if you like, the enabler or the arteries through which the lifeblood, really, of the EU's single market flows. Without that TEN-T, we would not have an EU single market. And we keep strengthening, of course, and extending these transport networks. We've already extended the TEN-T, as it's known, to the Western Balkans and also the Eastern Partnership countries. So our approach to connectivity, including, of course, with Asia, it focuses very much on quality. So this means that the EU, it wishes to connect and link with partners in a way which ensures strong economic development. There must be new opportunities for growth. It must strengthen the social security systems, increase resilience. It must avoid financial and fiscal imbalances. And of course, ever more important, it has to minimize the environmental and climate impacts. So, in other words, we focus on sustainable connectivity. It delivers environmental, economic, social, and financial sustainability. Now, this connectivity strategy with Asia, it gives a more strategic importance and more visibility to the efforts that the EU has been putting in building stronger connections with Asia. I won't go over many of them, we don't have time, but you will know that we have transport dialogues with some of our friends here, Japan, Singapore, ASEAN. We've agreed to launch new ones with other partners. We have a connectivity platform with China, and we have also signed actually quite recently a connectivity partnership with Japan, and we're exploring options with other countries. But now coming back to ASEAN, as I said, our relations have been upped to a strategic level, but also actually at that meeting, the ministers endorsed the joint EU-ASEAN connectivity statement. And they recognize that the EU and ASEAN have been cooperating on connectivity and acknowledged the importance of strengthening synergies with the master plan on ASEAN Connectivity 2025. So when I look at this question, how do we deepen cooperation between ASEAN and the EU in enhancing smart, sustainable connectivity in the region? My immediate reaction, and I hope this is not immodest, is that we've been doing a lot. What we need to look at now is where we can do more, how, and better. Now, one very good example, and we will come to rail, but we should not forget the connectivity, especially with Europe, is not going to be fundamentally about rail. Here it's going to be sharing our experience of what we've done in the EU and how that could be useful for ASEAN. But in terms of our connectivity, it's going to be aviation mainly, and we are negotiating now and very close to completing the Comprehensive Air Transport Agreement. That will be the first aviation agreement between two regions, and it will bring more than 1 billion people together. As I mentioned, we have a transport dialogue. This is our main platform to advance transport connectivity and cooperation, and we need to bring more ideas to the table, proposals in order to engage even deeper and better. We had our last meeting in November, and in fact, smart and sustainable mobility was perhaps the most important topic of our agenda. It's not news to you, the European Green Deal, that's very much a priority for us. Europe will become carbon neutral by 2050. Transport and connectivity is part of the problem. It has to be part of the solution. So the Commission presented there a sustainable and smart mobility strategy, and it aims to reduce transport carbon emissions by 90% by 2050. And there we're looking at focusing on zero-emission vehicles, greening urban mobility, smart by making connected and automated multimodal mobility, and of course resilient, again reinforcing the single market. And then there's digital innovation, smart urbanization are among the objectives of the master plan on ASEAN connectivity, so they sound very similar to what we're doing in terms of EU smart mobility. So my first suggestion on how to deepen our cooperation is rather obvious. We need to, of course, complete the initiatives that are underway, like the aviation agreement, but we also need to focus transport cooperation in priority areas, such as sustainable urban mobility, intelligent transport, alternative fuels, across all transport modes. So like I said, we discussed this at our last dialogue, and I believe that we are now going to take that forward. Now, coming back to rail, this is where I will shortly hand the floor to Carol, but just to illustrate an example of how it's the most sustainable form of transport, rail carries 7% of all EU passengers and 11% of our goods, but it's responsible for less than 0.5% of all transport greenhouse gas emissions. So rail is, for us, it's safe to transport passengers and goods, and it's becoming even safer and more efficient thanks to new technologies, which Carol will speak on. So as I mentioned before, it plays a fundamental role in terms of our trans-European networks. The European Smart Mobility Strategy, which we've just adopted, gives a lot of importance to it. One of the ambitions that we have is doubling high-speed rail times across Europe by 2030, so within the next decade. And this year, let's not forget, is the European Year of Rail. So while we'll be doing a lot this year to bring the spotlight on rail in the EU, I hope also this is a trigger for enhanced cooperation with ASEAN. So there, I will now pass the floor, in the interest of time, to Carol, but just to say that we appreciate very much the positive initiative of Thailand, which has reached out to us in terms of learning from the EU experience in rail. I think we certainly have a unique experience in that we have cross-border regional rail network, and I think that is unique. But in conclusion, it's what I said at the beginning. Transport is the backbone of our single market. So to deliver a green recovery, we need to establish safe, secure, efficient, and ever more sustainable transport. And certainly rail, for us, is very much at the center of that. If I may finish, I just wanted to say that in terms of connectivity, I think it was Henry Ford, and he, of course, pioneered that Model T car. He arguably brought transport, mobility, and connectivity to the masses. And he very famously said, coming together is a beginning, keeping together is progress, and working together is success. Well, the EU and ASEAN, we came together over 40 years ago and we established dialogue relations. We've kept together during this time. We've made a lot of progress, including now a strategic partnership. What we must now continue to do is work together in strengthening the transport links, in adopting the CATA and ensuring more sustainable connectivity and mobility, and that cooperation particularly is important on rail. Without further ado, I hand over the floor to Carol Vink, and I look forward also to the questions. Thank you. Please, Carol.
Hello. Do you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much, Almut. Good morning, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. The introduction of Harvey was perfect in the sense that I can put my presentation in the frame of the general terms which Harvey was using. I understand that, well, first of all, let me present myself. I have run the Belgian Railways for 3 years, and then I became for 14 years the coordinator of the interconnectivity at the European level. When I read the ASEAN Connectivity Master Plan, I noticed that in fact the key drivers for the ASEAN countries are: one, achieve competitive growth by enhanced competitivity in the region, and now we specify in a green environment, facilitating economies of scale, integrated production networks, enhance inter-regional trade, attract investments, promote deeper ties among ASEAN people. And the assets, in my opinion, of the ASEAN member states are very important to do this. You have growing economies, you have a high percentage of well-educated young population and digitally savvy. You have significant urban centers which have to be connected, and you have also important industrial areas which have to be connected. So in the European Union, with 27 member states, we faced exactly challenges. To illustrate the importance of connectivity at the European level, I mentioned the conclusion of a macroeconomic study for the EU, which says that the expected impact of introducing the connectivity, and particularly of rail, would amount to almost 1.5 to 2% of GDP, which represent 300 billion euros per year. Now, in Europe, we have a population of 500 million. In ASEAN, I understand we have a population of 600 million. So in that sense, in terms of economies, we are talking about the same sizes. In the EU, in order to formulate the connectivity, we said and we specified in a very clear way that we wanted to realize a sustainable and interoperable rail transport network, both for passengers and for freight. Now, the big question is, how do you do this? How do you implement this? How do you deploy this? Well, we came to the conclusion, and we deployed it in that way also, that you would need to fulfill 3 conditions. One is to remove the bottlenecks on the infrastructure, particularly at the level of the cross-border. Secondly, deploy a standardized signalization European system, and in Europe we call it the European Rail Transport Management System, ERTMS. And that unique system, which is now implemented and accepted and agreed on by the 27 countries, that replaced 23 different signalization systems in Europe. And the third thing which you have to do in order to realize the connectivity is to harmonize the operational rules and approval procedures for the railways, because mainly they are still national. So we have in the process of harmonizing this also at the European level. Now, since it is impossible to implement at once, in one shot, such a program on the existing network, we started by deploying it on a limited number of corridors. And in order to involve all member states, we have organized it in such a way that each member state was connected at least on one corridor. So the way we implemented it, and we have started now 10, 12, 15 years ago, we have a certain number of successes, And we can also say that we see a certain number of big benefits. And the ones which I want to mention, because these are important in the frame of the interconnectivity program, which is considered for the ASEAN countries, is, first of all, the ERTMS, the signalization system, which is the basis for the interconnectivity. The ERTMS can be implemented gradually, taking into account the existing national networks, and those have to be eliminated gradually, but we can take that into account in the deployment of ERTMS. Secondly, and that's very important because we will see some developments in the future, ERTMS allows for further development. For instance, the automated roads. For instance, future conducting systems controlled by satellite. So the system gives the possibility of further technological and digital development. The third one, which is important in terms of the development we see now, is that ERTMS is compatible with the new 5G communication system. So we are prepared for the future in terms of communication systems. The fourth, which I want to mention, is that ERTMS, and that's very important also, ERTMS can have a financial return. We have calculated at the European level that we can expect a return of about 10% because it increases the capacity on the tracks, it requires less operational and maintenance costs, and because there is no more lateral equipment needed along the track if you go to the ERTMS level 2. If you will stay with ERTMS, it reduces in some way. And the fifth, because this gives credibility to our ERTMS and the interconnectivity programs, ERTMS has been very successful in exporting it worldwide to countries interested in renewing their rail network or investing in new rail connections. Ladies and gentlemen, the European Union has about 20 years experience now with interconnectivity by rail. There is a complete agreement among the 27 member states on the absolute need for rail interconnectivity and on the way to reach it. And this is a very important political problem also, because you have to have the political commitment for the 27 member states, in order to deploy the interconnectivity program. It is also one, as already mentioned, it is also one of the main projects of the new European Green Deal. And of course, it's for that reason also, or that is one of the reasons why this year has been declared the European Year of Rail. In our recommendations, I think that in terms of what we can bring is that the experience, the know-how, and the experience you need in order to realize and implement an interconnected rail network. We can support ASEAN on effective, interoperable, safe, sustainable, cross-border rail network in the ASEAN region. I think I thank you for the attention. I also I'm sure that the collaboration which Javier was talking about can be very pragmatic and also very efficient and effective, and we are open for a further dialogue with the ASEAN countries. Thank you very much.
Many thanks to both of you, Javier and Carl. I gave you extra time, as you saw, partly because I'm just very interested myself in hearing about both the EU's experience and maybe, something that I always keep in mind when we think about the developments and how fast ASEAN has developed is how much time it really takes to develop a comprehensive system across many countries. So we should not feel too discouraged in this region if it takes longer. And maybe sometimes we have even a step forward and half a step back, and then it goes a little forward. It will take time, but I think there's a lot of experience in Europe that one can take, adjust to the system and to the specificities of ASEAN, and work with that. And so I think the idea of the dialogue moving to strategic partnership is excellent because it really goes both ways. And there's a lot to, in the ASEAN region, I think, in terms of digitalization and moving forward so fast that I'm sure Europe can learn from. So I'm not wanting to make this at all a one-way street, right? This is really a partnership. So excellent for that. Now I'm moving to a colleague who I know very well, Seth Tan from Infrastructure Asia. Welcome. Seth, you have your time slot. I'll give you what you need to have. Quick question, since you probably frame it that way anyway. Singapore is one of the leading champions in terms of smart city. No doubt, I live here. I know exactly what that means and how much this has developed and how fast. What do you think should be the priority for ASEAN in order to advance smart connectivity in ASEAN, and specifically also within and across countries in this region? Over to you, Seth. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Almu. And Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. I'm Seth Tan, and I head up Infrastructure Asia, which is a regional infrastructure facilitation office under the Singapore government. We are also Singapore's representative on ASEAN's lead implementing body for sustainable infrastructure, or LIPSI in short. Thank you for having us today. This afternoon, I would like to touch on three interrelated themes. The first is the importance of private sector involvement in infrastructure. The second is how private sector involvement can accelerate digital connectivity. The third is how can private sector involvement accelerate physical connectivity. Even before COVID-19, there is a large infrastructure financing gap in Asia. This has been worsened by COVID-19, where governments have had to channel their already strained budget to health and social progress to mitigate the impact of the pandemic. Compared to other more developed regions where private sector investment in infrastructure can be as high as 50 to 60%, in Asia, the percentage is relatively low, at 10 to 15%. To support the shorter-term needs of infra-led recovery plans and the longer-term needs of further urbanization and growth in ASEAN economies, private sector investment could be further tapped. There is substantial global capital available in the infrastructure sector. The world's 500 largest asset managers collectively control more than $80 trillion worth of investable resources in infrastructure projects. And what we observe today, just by looking at the Singapore financial ecosystem, is that there are now more diverse sources as well, ranging from the traditional corporate developers, now to institutional investors or infra funds, platform investors, family offices, and even public market investors. And depending on the asset type, different sources can be tapped. Digital connectivity is one area where private sector can be more relevant in ASEAN economies. In one of the ASEAN Infrastructure Discussion Series organized by InfraAsia and ASEAN Secretariat in 2020, Butina from the World Bank shared about the importance of digital transformation and commented that data is the new oil for the 21st century. Advancing digital connectivity is by no means an easy feat. It can be achieved through the deployment of internet-connected hardware and intensive digitalization. Successful smart cities cannot exist in a vacuum. Beneath the glitter, they ride on the readiness of business and residents to hop on the digital ecosystem and require the pervasive integration to a digital backbone. In order to achieve that, there's a need to establish a massive web of connectivity between tens of thousands of IoT nodes and data centers, and collaboration is key. Digital connectivity is one of the most important catalysts for economic and social development for the future. In Southeast Asia, successful implementation of the digital agenda is estimated to be able to add $1 trillion to ASEAN's GDP over the next 10 years. It will also help ASEAN lead to the forefront of global competitiveness as a world-leading digital hub. An example is e-commerce and digitized payment systems, which plays a key role in facilitating cross-border trade and foreign investment. With the right digital infrastructure in place, a much greater proportion of ASEAN's 650 million population will be able to engage in commerce across the region and with the wider world with their laptops, tablets, or mobile phones. The rise of e-commerce will create spin-offs for adjacent industries such as infrastructure, logistics, financing. Another example is digital tools, which can help with better planning, better design, better construction, and better operation and maintenance of many types of infrastructure. And in all these areas, private sector can bring more ideas on innovation and increasingly affordable technology to help with growth. Private sector investment can also be tapped for rolling out digital connectivity. There are well-known areas like investments in telco towers, but again, there are now more diverse sources like listing of broadband fiber network on stock exchange as a business trust, and also blended financings for some greenfield digital infrastructure. Lastly, I'd like to briefly touch on physical connectivity. Notwithstanding the pandemic, traffic of goods remain very important, as well as newer models to facilitate urban transport. For urban transport, InfraAsia noticed that there is now more interest on transit-oriented developments in some Southeast Asian countries. Transit-oriented development, or short form TOD, maximizes residential, commercial, and entertainment space within walking distance of public transport nodes. It is designed to increase access to public transport with features that promotes transit ridership and mobility without dependence on automobiles. It is well known that TOD improves the livability of cities, and Singapore has certainly benefited from this model. As population growth is increasingly centered in Asian cities, building around and on top of multimodal transport stations has become a popular way to cross-finance urban transportation and public amenities in well-connected locations. The cross-finance also helps to take off some pressure on fare revenues, as governments inevitably want to keep urban transport affordable to the population. Toll roads, particularly through asset recycling of brownfield toll roads, could also be a viable asset class to involve private sector. During 2020, InfraAsia and ASEAN Secretariat organized another event as part of the ASEAN Infrastructure Discussion Series, where a brownfield toll road from the initial rolling pipeline of connectivity projects was showcased. That webinar was conducted in May of 2020. But even during that time, 70 investors, development and commercial financiers attended the discussion, and a few sophisticated investors raised their hands to explore the possibility of investing into the toll road, as their experience elsewhere could help them better appreciate and structure to mitigate risks even during trying times, and could help them find areas to improve toll and non-toll revenue, and could help them find ways to improve the efficacy of the assets in areas such as climate resilience, particularly flood resilience. I hope my short sharing provoked a few thoughts, and look forward to more discussions. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Tess. And as always, very good additions to the discussion we already had. I think very good to highlight both the private sector engagement, and I think Singapore has been, in that sense, sort of exemplary how you work across private, public sector, academia towards solving a problem. And it's not it's not the problem owned by one, it's the problem is owned by the country, and you deploy all resources to do that. And I think that's important. And obviously digitalization and how far it has come in this region, I think, is important. I have a question later for, I think, everybody in this round on whether the pandemic, in your view, will strengthen actually intra-regional ties. That's at least our theory right now. But you know, is that something you see coming as well? That across within ASEAN, it gives a boost to just make sure that these the flows of goods and eventually people. Right now, it's more goods. Is strengthened even further to shorten some of the delivery span that you need in order to get products going around in the region. With that, can I go over to His Excellency Kun Nikornde from Balangkura, from Ambassador ambassador attached to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. This one I got right. I'm very sorry, Harvey, again, that, I mean, elevating somebody to a higher level is better than reducing them. So at least I went the right way, right? There's no problem in doing it that way around. So, Ambassador, you're overlooking Mekong sub-regional cooperation frameworks. In that sense, the question to you is also, as the proponent, as Thailand's one of the proponents of the ACMECS master plan, what is the role, in your view, of sub-regional cooperation in promoting sustainable connectivity in and beyond the region? So we're focusing very much internally in this area. Over to you, Excellency. Thank you.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me well? Okay. Thank you, Almut, for the questions. I will be brief. In the interest of time, I shall divide my interventions into two, and in response to your questions, the role that the sub-region, as you already mentioned, I've been responsible for the connectivity issues of the ACMEX, which is the Ayeyarwady, Mekong, and Chao Phraya economic cooperation strategy for the past 5 years. And I've been involved with the drafting and the conclusion of the master plan of the sub-region. So yes, indeed, it's very important. I will share on two issues, as I mentioned earlier, is that, first of all, what does the master plan addresses, and how would that connect the sub-region, the Mekong sub-region, which involves 5 countries, Cambodia, Laos, Myanmar, Thailand, and Vietnam, to ASEAN, and as well as what is the pressing challenge which the sub-region is facing now, and how I see connectivity as how connectivity is going to contribute to that. So first of all, the master plan addresses three aspects of connectivity, which is hardware connectivity, software synchronization of rules and regulations, as well as the human aspect of connectivity. Or in the master plan itself, it's been called seamless ACMEC for the hardware side, synchronized ACMEC for the harmonization of rules and regulations, and smart and sustainable ACMEC for the human resource development. So this master plan was adopted in 2018, and many people has called this adoption of the master plan, the first of which has been adopted by the 5 countries, as many countries has looking at it as the reinvigoration of ACMEC. We have picked, the member countries have agreed, concurred to use connectivity as the keyword, the catchphrase, the sound bites, because we know that the strength of the sub-region lies in connectivity. We realize that, first of all, we are among we are as a subset of ASEAN, and we are basically the 5 mainland ASEAN countries. But we are also acting as a bridge between the Indian Ocean and the Pacific, as well as between the archipelago ASEAN states and mainland China. We have a coastal shipping scheme to India. We have the trilateral highway linking the main Southeast Asia to India. And Thailand ourselves, we are developing a scheme which panelists in the morning from the EEC, Dr. Laksamon has mentioned that the Thai Bridge project, which will also link the Indian Ocean to the Pacific. So all these are initiatives. Its objective is to create a cobweb of connectivity in all three dimensions, that would be beneficial for all, for first and foremost for member countries of the ACMEX. How would it complement the ASEAN Master Plan 2025, and as well as the dialogue partners, as ACMEC has also received several development partners. As of now, we have 8 development partners, 6 of which are the Mekong development partners who are already development partners of the sub-region. And we have also received Australia, New Zealand, and Israel as our new development partners. So all these will contribute to us being closer infrastructurally, and in harmonization of rules and regulations, as well as bringing the people closer together. So that's the, and we're building on the existing platform of, many panelists have mentioned the Greater Mekong sub-region, the GMS. We had something called the Cross-Border Trade Agreement, where we are building on that. We're not, reinventing the wheels. We're not reinventing something new. So we're just strengthening all this software aspects so that we can be more seamless in interacting among each other. So that's the first aspect that I wanted to mention about how the master plan of ACMEC has been conceived and has progressed. Now, on my second point is that last December, ACMEC members has just had its for us, although it's Thailand's proposal, that every country will be racing on in the post-COVID, post-pandemic economic recovery. And in Thailand's proposal, in our view, we see this economic recovery not as a race. We think we need to cooperate on that. Every country is going towards one single objective of how do we recover fast, how do we recover safe, and how do we recover more as equitable as we can. So we think policy synchronization is the key element here. And I think, at least among ourselves, the 5 countries, CLMV and Thailand, we need to strengthen our policy dialogue and have our policy synchronization and synergy, so that those dialogue partners and development partners can synchronize easier with us. But first, we have to speak the same language, So that is the second pillar of my intervention. I think I've reached my 7 minutes. So as you can see, we're talking about the traditional connectivity in terms of hardware, software, and people, and we are also looking at policy synchronization, policy connectivity, how countries can work together, cooperate in this post-pandemic, I would not like to say race, but post-pandemic economic recovery, how we can go work hand in hand towards that same goal. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, His Excellency. That was really interesting. I took copious notes on a lot of what you said, including, the 2021 post-COVID recovery not being a race. I couldn't agree more with you. I think this has to be a synchronized. If it's a race for Asia to get up, it has to be a synchronized race. That together, this region will definitely be stronger. So, very, very well taken note of that. Excellent. We move on. I just wanted to one more time say, if anybody has questions, feel free to start posting them as well. We can collect and then ask at the end, all fine, so that you don't lose your train of thought when you hear somebody speak. Please note it down. We're happy to receive any. But without further ado, let me go to our last speaker, who is Professor Arpita Mukherjee from the Indian Council for Research on International Economic Relations. And I'm actually delighted to have somebody not from the ASEAN region with us, because I think there's a lot of collaboration to happen across Asia, and this is definitely key. So for you, I have a question. Given India's expertise in advanced technology, and I've really been watching with a mix of jealousy and awe how India is now developing its rail system to a much higher level of freight transport than before. I think that's excellent in my view. What do you think are the prospects for further cooperation between ASEAN and India under the Act East policy in areas such as smart and sustainable connectivity? Thank you very much. Over to you, Professor Mukherjee.
Thank you, Alman, and good afternoon to all of you. It has been my pleasure to be here and to always to talk about India ASEAN. This is very deep in our heart as we look into the Look East policy, and we actually began our discussion of India ASEAN with physical connectivity. The reason was that, in spite of ASEAN being so close to us, the northeast part of India was underdeveloped, and we never used the land route or the railways or other forms, and we used to go round and round into the ASEAN. So therefore this has been a focus area of our government now, to look into the development of the Northeast, to look into the infrastructure and connect the two, India and ASEAN together. As we tend to do this, we realize that, physical connectivity is not enough. You have to move into the digital connectivity as a next step for a better connectivity across, in the case of energy, you need to look at grid connectivity. In the case of telecom, you look into telecom and broadband connectivity, and that led to something like e-commerce connectivity and better logistics and reducing the logistic cost across these, across ASEAN and India, both at an individual country level, because we do have trade agreements with some of the ASEAN member countries, as well as we have a trade agreement with the ASEAN. So that was the level in which we were operating with the individual country and as well as the ASEAN level. Now, to do that, as we heard our speakers from other countries say, the same problem is with India, that we need to, India is not a single market. We have like 28 states, like 28 mini countries together, and we have to follow somewhat a European Union kind of model. So we brought in the GST to have a single tax. So we are trying to do a single market within ourselves. And one of the effort that I was myself involved in was to develop a proper risk management system for import clearances and export clearances at the border ports, because that has been a real issue with India whenever anybody trades with India. I'm very happy to say that we now have developed two IT manuals for the Food Safety Authority of India. They are available online. You can have a look at it if you want. I can share with you. So what we tried to do here was to use the digitalization for a RMS control system rather than a manual system where you are always in, at the beck and call of the custom officers or the allied agencies to decide whether your product will go in or out of the country. So we were trying to put in certain synergies and processes in place and certain risk communication systems in place, like the RFS portal or the Eurofight portal. I may say that the process has been laid down, the IT manuals have been developed, but now it is to the implementation stage. We did also developed a broad framework at one point in time for a India-ASEAN e-commerce platform, a digital B2B platform, which is more of a government-led initiative for the MSMEs of the countries here. What we realize is the big firms can always locate their own business partners and work, but MSMEs and startup, they need a hand-holding platform which will be it will help them to connect, which will be like a virtual B2B, which is, we thought of it before the COVID, and but it somehow the COVID made it a necessity. And also the market knowledge, because today it is available for many ASEAN countries and India, but you have to search multiple government websites to actually understand what is happening. So this is still at a conceptual stage. India and ASEAN did allocate a joint e-commerce budget at some point in time and thought about doing something together in e-commerce. This never took off. Because India actually came out of RCEP, it did not even take off within the RCEP framework. So there is a need to really relook and rebuild the cooperation in this area. A number of government clearances that used to go were previously offline. Now, much of it has now become online within India. And the Indian, Ministry of Commerce is trying to bring in more and more processes online. So, but where are there certain issues? There have also been some new issues with ASEAN and India. Relationship, and that some of it has been because of the geostrategic and other reasons. Like India is not a part of the BRI. And much of ASEAN, you have BRI, going through it. India is also not a part of RCEP today. So many initiatives that can have, integration within ASEAN can be easily taken through RCEP into the member countries through the trade agreement becomes a little difficult, and you need to put in a more effort in that. India, one of the core issues has been that India is also not part of the e-commerce negotiations of the WTO. So India is quite out of many of the forums that you can take it in. So what are the forums that are now available for you to bring in your discussion is ASEAN-India Initiative Forums, the G20 Forum, because Indonesia will take over the G20 presidency next year, and Indonesia will be driving many of these agendas of ASEAN and international cooperation, and bringing in private sector and government funding into the region in the digital initiatives through the ASEAN platform. So this will be an area where you need to look into. The other area where you really need to look into, and may actually India may also be very willing to take it, is the Indo-Pacific. So Indo-Pacific and G20, because after India and Indonesia will be a part of TRIOCA for a long, long time. 3 years is a very long time to work together to bring a commonality, and that needs to be looked into from a relationship building point of view between India and ASEAN. There is also a very good scope for collaboration in startups and skill building and high technology, and how do you share the manpower. Some ASEAN countries are in shortage of manpower, we have enough, but are we really collaborating in the right directions, or do we have the right skills? How do we do that? This is a and there is funding available, and we need money for the startups to grow and bigger companies. So this is an area which also remains largely unexplored, because when India and ASEAN signed their agreement, they signed it in goods, then investment. It is a fragmented, agreement. As they revisit their agreement, these will be new areas, or for IR technology should be an area where they should broadly look into more collaborative approach. While I have looked into these two country things, I have seen that, one of the core problems in the last year has been there are certain vulnerable groups, and these vulnerable groups, for example, MSMEs, women. If we target these vulnerable groups to make certain, collaborative platforms, I think that is where we need to go forward, rather than saying we need an India-ASEAN e-commerce treaty. You can say that if we have an Indian-ASEAN joint e-commerce platform, collaboration, easing of the finance, these are like pilot projects. Treat them as pilot projects and go ahead, and I think then the movement will happen. Like, we have a concept called a South Asian Women Entrepreneurship Platform. So these will be some of the initiatives if we take forward forward with ASEAN, like ASEAN India Women Entrepreneurship Platform or youth platforms. These will be the forums through which we move to the next step. There are a lot of areas of collaboration, but the collaboration has to be at multiple levels. I think there is a need for more G2G collaborations for sharing of data, for having a framework to share of data, because many ASEAN countries do not have a data localization regulation or a data protection regulation. Even if they have it, we may think it is restrictive, and it may not be restrictive. So that the data related future planning is very important for countries to talk about and discuss and share. So I think it is important for government to talk about data, government to first give a push for a thumbs up for such a platform, like you please go ahead and do it. In India, if you get a support of the government, I think private sector is good enough to create it, but they need a support. Third is that we need to look into some kind of a short-term and long-term plans and targets. I think much of the India-ASEAN relationship falls short because we do have very nice concept, but all of this which I'm saying is in the paper. Nothing is actionable. So we need to have some very short but actionable targets and then move into the next step as we do it internally. And I think that will lead to more collaboration. There is an area of concern today. And that area of concern is FDI. FDI from neighboring state and China, the Indian regulation that has been in place. I do have a lot of companies from ASEAN questioning me, how it happens, because many of their board members are Chinese. I think there is a need for ASEAN as a whole and as the member state to work with the Indian government on more clarity on this FDI issue, because if there is more clarity that is put into the picture, I think the collaborations between the private sector will be much easily flowing. What is the regulatory clarity? So I think I have already exhausted my 7 minutes, so I will stop here, and if you have any questions, I'm happy to take that.
Excellent, many thanks, and with a lot of energy. I'm sure nobody will have kind of tried to quietly leave the room, because you've really, and I'm sure there's lots more to share, and I get the general sense from everybody who has spoken so far that this is an exciting topic, and notwithstanding, or maybe in parts also due to COVID, there are actually opportunities to kind of build back better. Should we hopefully soon really get into the post-COVID phase, fingers crossed. And it might not be the same in every country, but as a whole, I think we're moving in that direction. I don't think we had a particular question. I'm just going to check one more time with Shannon. And is there anybody who has asked a question online or in the forum that I should pick up? Otherwise, I'm going to try to wrap up, and I'm sure people have questions afterwards. Anything, Shannon? Mute, no?
Nope.
Not coming, okay. So in that sense, let me just quickly go over. So first of all, thank you. Thanks to all the speakers. I think it was excellent to put you together in a panel. There was lots of good thoughts that I think need follow-up, as always. Workshops and conferences are there to tease us, nothing else. That's at least my sense, to tease us, to read further, to get further into contact, and to really collaborate more. I think, Fraser, you mentioned very well in the beginning how, in terms of just strategies and master plans and whatever, this region is loaded, right? So now it's not so much a question of having more plans, it's to connect the plans, and connect the connectivities is actually the right title for the region here. I think there's lots of opportunities, and perhaps the next step is really kind of making sure that these don't reinvent the wheel, don't duplicate, but really are connected, broader across the region, sub-regional ones. I think there's lots to do. I do also think that with the with COVID, as Aprita said very clearly, things that previously were no, we cannot do this, and this cannot be done, and that cannot be done, and this cannot be put online, all of a sudden it's all feasible. So we need to take that momentum. It's a momentum that was created in which governments that had previously been perhaps a bit reluctant have now realized that's the only way how you still keep goods flowing across countries. So we needed to do it, and it worked, and the region has really stepped up to it. And I must say, compared to some of the other regions that the World Bank is engaged in, this one here has really stepped up a lot. So this is good. I think from Harvey and Carol, we heard that the dialogue between the EU and ASEAN has now moved into a strategic partnership. I think that's excellent because it is absolutely a two-way route, and there's lots and lots that's happening in Asia right now, including how you handle a pandemic. I think I will put that plug in there. And maybe in the aftermath, you know, how do you rebuild trade, and how do you recover economically from this disastrous year? That's definitely something that, you know, enhances, I think, the collaboration between the two regions, and is something that going forward, you know, the aviation agreement, I think, is excellent between the two regions, and this is something that cannot take off fast enough. And I think, you know, EU has very ambitious targets to reduce carbon emission by 90% by 2050, if I'm correct. This region here is getting there as well. I hear more and more from governments, including the ones that are still investing heavily in coal, that next big topic is greening energy, greening transport. This is where we're moving, and there's a lot of openness and interest in doing so. So I think that's excellent. Seth, you mentioned private sector involvement. Couldn't agree more, and also repeating Busena's kind of data is the new oil. But it is. It's exactly what it is, and I think using data smartly to enhance collaboration and connectivity is absolutely critical. And I think one thing, as we said before, that Singapore has done really well is incorporating all that private sector engagement in a strategy towards solving problems. I think that's excellent. And I think for some countries in the region, there's still a little bit of this is public and this is private. I think you guys are crossing the line all the time, and look what happens. It works better, actually, without having to say this is one thing and this is the other thing. So ideology aside, I think this is the right strategy forward towards solving problems. Then I heard from Kun Nikornje very much about the sub-regional initiatives. I think it's an excellent combination of hardware, software, and the human aspects. I was really happy to hear that as well, because in a lot of initiatives we hear hardware, we hear software, and so people are somehow stuffed into software in the hope that this works out. But I think the focus on seamless for hardware, synchronized for software, and smart and sustainable for the human aspect, and building a cobweb of connectivity, I think that's a really important one, especially for the countries, you know, the land-based countries here between India, Europe, and then the outer Pacific. These countries here in the middle, as Laos has dubbed itself, wanting to become from landlocked to land-linked. But I think that applies to the whole land-based Asia, Southeast Asia countries that really want to become a good link, and as a link, the opportunities to benefit from that rather than just waving through are enormous. And I think that's really something that these sub-regional initiatives are focusing very much on, including how you synchronize your recovery. I think that's an excellent topic. And lastly, Professor Mukherjee, you pointed out very well that India and ASEAN, you know, focusing on physical connectivity alone is definitely not enough. But also that we have sort of treatments in place, and we aren't really looking at how to operationalize some of them, or we aren't really putting enough effort into piloting what you said, some, you know, initiatives at the MSME level, women entrepreneurs, you mentioned youth initiatives. I think these would all be good initiatives. So on the one hand, we do need the bigger sort of the 60-foot view agreements, but then we really need to start working out some of the connectivity at the practical level. And I think you know, in that sense, clarifying FDI collaboration was an important point, and how we link up with everything that's happening on BRI in this region as well. So excellent panel. Thank you all very, very much for this. And I want to hand it back now to, I think it's Shannon, is it? I think we're closing actually right on time. We did excellent. Thank you all very much for sticking to that. And I look forward to staying in contact and to our next meeting. Thank you so much. Handing it back. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Moderator, and all of the panelists for a very insightful and stimulating session. So here are our poll results for our last question. What first comes to your mind when talking about smart connectivity? And 49% of the respondents chose smart cities.
Smart cities. I think they also mean that connecting the smart cities also around the region as well. And up next, to conclude key messages from the seminar, we will hear the key takeaways from the ASEAN Secretariat.
Thank you very much, Excellencies, speakers, participants. I think we have a very rich discussion today. 3 connectivity teams shape our discussion at the seminar today with guidance from the opening session. We discussed global supply chain connectivity, green and digital connectivity, smart and sustainable connectivity. The seminar provided an opportunity for us to reflect and discuss on what has been happening to connectivity initiatives, how to connect them, to share experiences, perspectives, and responses to the challenges of connecting the connectivities, and at the same time, to give thought to setting the directions for the future through partnership. Then we talk a lot about how we can translate regional initiatives to national implementation. We talk about having practical cooperation projects, something that is concrete that we can deliver, besides the high-level discussions that sometimes occur. Deputy Permanent Secretary Jutin Thorn this morning shared with us the 3 E's approach to work together to promote connecting the connectivities by ensuring resilient and sustainable regional supply chain, empowering digital ASEAN, and enhancing sustainability. Based on the deliberations today and contributions from the speakers, the co-organizers have put together a draft recommendation for this seminar. Please allow me to highlight some salient points. Partnership is key to the success of connecting the connectivities, and partnership on connectivity between ASEAN and external partners to support the implementation of Master Plan on ASEAN Connectivity 2025 should be based on the objectives and principles of the ASEAN outlook on the Indo-Pacific, such as openness, inclusivity, mutual respect, mutual trust, and mutual benefit. To enhance COVID-19 recovery efforts and build resilience in the region, ASEAN and external partners should ensure that their cooperation will support the effective implementation of the ASEAN Comprehensive Recovery Framework and its implementation plan. ASEAN member states and RCEP participating countries must expedite an early ratification and entry into force of the RCEP agreement, as it is crucial for furthering regional economic integration, achieving seamless logistics, and ensuring resilient and sustainable supply chain connectivity in the region. ASEAN should continue its work on enhancing multimodal transport linkages and interconnectivity to build greater efficiency and resilience of the regional supply chain, as well as explore the development of facilities or infrastructure projects that will help integrate regional transportation network. ASEAN should harness the opportunities of digital trade and explore cooperation in strengthening digital trade platform to enhance business competitiveness, particularly micro, small, medium enterprises, digitalization, and digital skills development. The initiative by the ASEAN Business Advisory Council on promoting ASEAN digital trade connectivity could therefore be taken forward with the support from ASEAN member states and interested external partners. ASEAN should strengthen cooperation in developing robust regulations to enhance digital capability and enable digital connectivity, taking into account the ASEAN framework on digital data governance. ASEAN should encourage more private sector participation to co-create and seize opportunities from its growing economy and initiatives such as the initial pipeline for ASEAN infrastructure projects and the ASEAN Smart Cities Network. This includes investment and cooperation opportunities in green and digital infrastructure projects, as well as under sub-regional frameworks in the region, such as the ACMEX, BIMPIAGA, and IMTGT. Sustainable Development Goals could be the guiding compass in advancing sustainable connectivity. ASEAN may also explore how to synergize relevant development concepts or models, such as bio-circular green economy, as well as smart cities in its connectivity strategies and plans. So these draft key recommendations will be circulated to senior officials for their further consideration. So with that, thank you very much. I will hand over back to the MCs.
Thank you, Director Lim, for the concluding notes for thoughts. Distinguished participants, thank you for staying with us virtually, and I hope that you found the seminar informative and useful.
We have